Hi there, everyone who's joining us live in the Zoom room, or if you are watching this on Facebook, happy Wednesday. And thanks for being here today. I am Meg Townsend. I'm a whole being guide with Prasada, and this is Prasada Talks, Breathwork for Balancing Life. And we have super excited. We've got the OG of Prasada, Alice Dahmer, the reason everything. We're all here. Alice is here to talk about, tell us more about breath work. So before we even dive in, Alice, and before I even let you kind of introduce yourself, let's do a little breath work now, just so we can arrive. I don't know where everyone was just coming from. Maybe you were on a meeting, maybe you just had an intense phone call. We invite you to put away any extraneous screens that you have, and let's just get centered and arrive here. So slide towards the edge of your seat, so your feet can be flat on the floor, hopefully, and let your hands rest on your thighs, down by your sides or your desk. And just let your eyes soften, maybe even close if that feels comfortable in this moment. And let's take 3 breaths. Do this practice of 3 breaths, which is a long, deep breath in through your nose, and then a long, slow breath out of your mouth. Do that 2 more times, just at your breath pace. After this 3rd exhale, can your shoulders soften a bit more away from your ears? Just take a moment to check in with your body, your energy level, and your mind right now. Notice how you're feeling at this point on a Wednesday early afternoon. And do you feel more like a steady owl, a hamster on a wheel, or a bit of a sloth today? Share that in the chat. If you're here with us in the Zoom room live, share that in the chat. How are you feeling right now? Alice, how are you feeling?
Can you be an owl in a wheel?
Yes, because I was thinking, I feel like a sloth on a wheel.
Okay.
The wheel's going and I'm just like, it's just taking me with it.
We can never just pick the normal ones. So
I know we've got some owls, we've got some hamsters. Okay, so hopefully at least the 3 breaths gave you some time just to drop in and take a moment to notice. And we'll talk about different types of breath work as we dive in today. But first, Alice, I'd love to know, what is breath work? Like, what does that even mean? Because we're hearing that more and more these days in different areas of the world. Like, it's getting more popular beyond just like the sort of wellness niche. So can you tell us a little bit about what it is, what that exactly means when we hear breath work?
yeah, so I think it was a couple of years ago where it actually got entered as an official word in the dictionary. And I think that came about because more and more people were starting to talk about it. And I think about breath work in the word breath work very similar to the way that we talk about yoga. When you talk about yoga, yoga can mean a whole variety of different things. There's so many different types of yoga. Everything from last night, my partner and I were practicing yoga nidra, and he said, "Oh, you mean this is just a nap?" to super active yoga. And breath work is the same way. It's this yoga is about intentionally moving our bodies in certain ways, and we think about stretching. And breath work is actually becoming conscious of and using our breath in a particular way to achieve a certain benefit or have a certain purpose. So it's that we're really starting to look at and understand the physiology of our bodies and our nervous system, and how the breath, when we think about what are our tools, the breath is an immediate tool to shift that system.
Mhm.
And so, for most of us who are feeling like that hamster wheel, we're probably not going to get to erase all the things in our inbox or on our to do list to change the trajectory of our logistical day. But can we use breath in a way that can change the physiology of our day and our mindset about how we approach the work that we have to do?
Mm. I love that. That my one of my first yoga teachers, he always said, because we practiced yoga as a form of breath work, right? There was breath work throughout the postures. And he always said, if you want to change your mind, change how you're breathing. Right?
Absolutely.
And intentionally. And so breath work gives us those tools to intentionally do that and engage with that. And it's just so fascinating, all the science that's coming out to really support like this is what's going on.
And
So
it,
oops, sorry,
yeah,
go ahead.
well, and it's one of the things that when you talk about yoga, it's one of the things that makes yoga different. I mean, a lot of times we think about yoga as exercise. But the thing that distinguishes yoga from any other type of exercise is that it is a pairing. It is the dance with the breath. And so a lot of times when we come to breath work, people think about, they will immediately think about ujjayi breath or ocean breath. And most of the time, the first place that they will have experienced any kind of breath work is in a yoga practice. And that is what makes the yoga practice really land. And most of the time, if you're a person who practices yoga, the first year, I would say for me, probably the first 5 years was just about getting my body parts in the right places.
Mhm.
And then you realize, like, oh, it's this beautiful dance between, an inhale naturally makes you kind of have the poses that lift, and the exhale are the poses. And when you're thinking about that grounding and that cycle of expanding and contracting, that is the cycle of nature. And the breath is really what connects us in with, I mean, we're taking in the outer world and we're also taking it in and then we're expelling. It does certain things within our body and then it goes back out. So it's also a big, for me, it's also a big connector.
Hmm. So Alice, real quick, because somebody's messaging in, I don't know if you can talk a little bit louder. There might be some, I can hear you, but there is some tech thing on some people's ends where they've got their volume all the way up, but it's hard to hear you.
Okay, awesome. I'll use my mom voice.
Boom. Yes. Use your actor voice. All right. Some people can hear okay, but I just wanted, because a couple messages came in. So I wanted to address that right away.
Okay, awesome. Thank you guys.
So tell us a little bit before we kind of dive into the different types of breath work and how it can really support our life. I'd love to just hear, because we love stories. I think it's a great way to just tell. So this is a huge part of your practice and life and whole being journey. So I'd love just to hear a little bit more about how it's shaped your life.
Yeah, and I'd love for those who are in the webinar chat, please put any questions that you have that you might want to hear about while we talk about this. Yeah, I came to yoga practice kind of, I would say, later in life. I was not a kid that did yoga. I was definitely a pretty high strung kid. And so when I came to the practice of yoga, there was that physical piece. And as I developed a yoga practice, somehow along the way, a friend of mine introduced me to rebirthing, which was a type of breathing where you're lying on a mat, you're breathing in a certain way. And it was more for the purpose of kind of what comes up. So if you think about, we can have a dream and we go to sort of another mental place. The process of breathing in a particular way can take us to, it's almost like a conscious breathing and a conscious dreaming. And so in the rebirthing process, you lie on a mat, you breathe in a particular way for about an hour, and you basically can kind of go on a journey. You might have certain insights about relationships in your life. You might have certain sensations in your body where you start to explore that. And so that was really my first, I did that program. It was a 9-month program in Philadelphia at the Rebirthing Center. And then I got into holotropic breath work and training with Lenny and Elizabeth Gibson up in Vermont, dream shadow transpersonal breath work. And what I really appreciated about the work that was developed by Stan Groff is, we've got 3 breaths where we can immediately tap into our system and calm our system. On the other end of that, there's a whole bunch of different pranayama practices through yoga. And Meg, you've definitely taught me more about those different kinds of practices. And some of them are for actually, getting more energy to the body. We know that when we inhale, the heart rate goes up, and when we exhale, the heart rate goes down. And then as you move sort of along the spectrum, holotropic breath work is really was really developed by Stan Groff. He was working with LSD with all sorts of patients when LSD first came out and helping a lot of people with addictions and a lot of other problems. And then, everything got criminalized. So he was not able to use that. And he had had a lot of success with people sort of in those experiences of listening, of LSD, of being able to sort of have insight about why they were having a smoking habit or why they were doing some particular, um, uh, addiction. So he invented this holotropic breath work where you're listening to music and you're breathing to basically take you to some of those more, have basically what people call a transformative experience or an exceptional experience. And within those experiences, how do you gain insight? And so after I did the transpersonal, the rebirthing breath work, I embarked on getting training in holotropic breath work. And in those experiences, there's a lot of times where you will revisit maybe some past grief, and you will be able to process through those experiences, because as you're on the mat and as you're breathing, you're also able to move your body. There's particular types of music that move you through that. And then at the end, you actually draw a mandala. And so it's called holotropic breath work. That's what was developed by Stan Groff. The people I trained with, Lenny Elizabeth, called their version transpersonal breath work. But it has really helped me process through. We all have some past things in our life that were hard. And there are things that come up every day. There are sad, hard things that happen in your life. And how do you have time to sort of see where those show up in your body and then process through them, integrate through them? And I just found a really good definition, that just made total sense to me about, we can live a life where we function as mature adults. We all can sort of keep our task list going, put food on the table, wash our clothes. But there's a point where you might ask, like, what's it all worth? Why are we doing it? What's happening? And so, this idea of, um, Robert Keegan discovered that while some adults stay frozen in time, a select few achieve meaningful growth. So we could go beyond that state. Right around middle age, for example, Keegan noticed that some people move beyond generally well-adjusted adulthood, or what he called self-authoring, into a different stage entirely, self-transforming, defined by heightened empathy, an expanded capacity to hold differing and even conflicting perspectives, and a general flexibility in how you think of yourself. Self-transforming is the developmental stage associated with wisdom. While it usually takes 3 to 5 years for adults to move through a given stage of development, Keegan found that the further you go up that pyramid, the fewer people make it to the next step. Move from self-authoring to self-transforming, for example, fewer than 5% of us ever make that jump. And so I was lucky enough to meet teachers along the way of people that I felt were really contributing to society in a way that helped move everyone forward. And so not everyone's quite ready for the holotropic breathwork experience, but if you are at that point of wanting that personal growth, it can help you. If you just need there's a great practice that I love. It's Kia Miller on Yoga Glow. It's called Balance the Brain. It's 20 minutes of chanting, and certainly, Meg, you can talk about, what's happening when we're chanting. And it's just a 20-minute chant. It's vibrating in the back of the throat, tapping into the vagus nerve. It's just one of the tools that I use daily, sort of help my nervous system, all the way to just 3 breaths in the moment. So I'll just say lastly, I think about the breath as almost like a best friend. That, when you spend time with a best friend, you develop a relationship with a best friend. And that best friend can console you, make you happy. You can console. It's a reciprocity relationship.
Did you ever see that? So in gosh, I forget what. You're so better at quoting things than I am, but one of my teachers, Pandaji, he actually speaks directly to this. I think it might have been in one of his translations of the Yoga Sutras, where he says, like, our mind and our breath are like old friends, right? And we can walk through life and they can kind of, not necessarily, if all is going right, we don't have to think about every inhale and exhale that we take.
Right.
And so we can not really think about it, not really realize, and just walk through life. Or when they remember, when they connect, he says it's like these old friends getting together. There's this familiarity, there's this comfort, there's this kind of connection to deeper wisdom. So I love that you've also extracted that without ever reading that book.
Well, and we talk about this idea that, and it comes up in the book. One of my favorite books that we all love is this book. I took the cover off because I just like that it's yellow. It's called Breath by James Nestor.
Yeah.
And we know that our physiology, we know that when we're not paying attention, we're breathing at a certain rate. Now, one of the great things about these devices, we all use a device at Prasada, is that we can actually see what our respiration rate is. And so part of the yoga practice is that we're training ourselves to breathe more slowly, which helps keep the nervous system more balanced. And that does create, I mean, I was the kid who was like, I was always kind of a little high strung. And if somebody dropped a book in class, I would be the one person screaming just because that sort of reflex. So, one of the big advantages of a breathwork practice is this capacity for your body when you're not paying attention to be breathing at a slower rate.
Yeah.
The other thing that I just and he's got this is just a great book. He's got some great stories, the size of our mouths, the way that our noses work, all that kind of good stuff. But he also talks about this concept, and I'm not going to get the oxygen, carbon dioxide, all that science. You'll have to look in the book to see that. But question comes up about fear, and they've got an experiment with people who have a bit of an off system, who never were afraid of anything, and they gave them a puff of, I can't remember if it was carbon dioxide or oxygen, and suddenly the person felt fear. So the question comes up is fear a mental construct, or is fear the physiology of our breath? Because when we're afraid, or when we detect that we don't have resources to handle a situation, we start to hold our breath.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is that fear coming from physiology? It's not necessarily a mental. So that's one of the things I thought was just so fascinating,
Hmm.
in his book. So highly recommend that one.
And it's like we have available to us this constant tool that we can choose to interface with in any way, shape, and form to deal with fear, sadness, anxiety, happiness. We've got this thing that can really just help us navigate life. And the thing that continues to, like, the word that keeps popping into my head right now is just resilience, right? So that it supports us in being more resilient and stable in the roller coaster of what happens in our lives.
Yeah, and that whole, in February we're here in the month of balance. And this idea that we think about work-life balance is the conversation that we have all the time. We don't really talk about the nervous system balance.
Mm.
And really that we're going to have these, you're going to get highly, and it's interesting, this conversation about stress, like, oh, I'm so stressed out. Well, what does that actually mean? Does that mean that you're feeling an elevated heart rate? An elevated heart rate can be excited. And so when does something that is natural, like we need to be excited, it builds a little bit of adrenaline. And it's good to be a little bit fearful before you're about to go talk and have an important meeting. Versus like that's a bad thing, that somehow we want to stay in this sort of very even, that's not really the experience of life, to be in this constant calm and never going to be feeling any kind of emotion. And that's one of the things about, these practices. The point is not that we're able to take all of life with just like, being the Dalai Lama here. The point is that we recognize that we're going to have times that are really challenging, but that oftentimes those things are where we're feeling most alive, because we quickly get bored when there's nothing sort of happening or everything's so even keel. We need novelty. We need different. We need change. We need challenges. We need purpose. Prasada, we say um, the purpose of having a life of thriving is living a life of health, purpose, and joy. Well, if you're pursuing a purpose, you're going to have challenging days. And whether you call that excitement or stress, the problem is when our nervous systems get so out of whack. And then how do we know how to regulate that so that we can come back and be in the moment? Because, you know, breathwork training is a part of Navy SEALs training. And the reason why it's a part of Navy SEALs training and part of military training now, especially a practice like box breathing, is because They know that they're going into stressful situations. They know they have to regulate their nervous system. They know they have to make super, super quick decisions. And a lot of times, not being able to verbally communicate with other people on their team. So they have to be in this sort of mental resonance with each other. And that coming into breath, being able to tap into that yourself and tap into that bigger group kind of dynamic. We don't really talk about that at the office. Like, what if we all were having short little breath breaks where the team just, even taking 3 breaths to get into that resonance? The military does it, they use it. So why aren't we doing that kind of more on a regular basis? The author of the book is James Nestor, Nestor, and it's great. If you listen to it on Audible, he reads it and he's got a really great voice, and it's great to hear him sort of tell the stories.
Somebody typed in the chat, this is an interesting question. The rebirthing breath work and also the transpersonal breath work. She wants to make sure that's not like Lamaze, like birthing breathing. And I think there's similarities, right? Like there's kind of a
Well,
similar but different purpose. I've never taken a Lamaze class, so I can't speak from experience.
so rebirthing is different in the fact that it was started by a guy named Leonard Orr. He was basically suicidal. He was trying to figure out like how he could calm his nervous system and what he could do. It was basically a trial and error. He decided to lie on a mat. And in rebirthing, you breathe like I mean, you're almost like hyperventilating. You can get a little buzzy in your fingers. So they call it tetany. But it was something to sort of shift your mental system. You're lying there. You're not moving and rebirthing. But it is a particular. Sandra Ray is now the person who's kind of pushing that forward. Leonard Orr has died. Um, it's different in the sense that holotropic breathwork was developed by Stan Grof and really based on people were having psychedelic experiences with LSD. It was helping them because what happens when you have a psychedelic experience is those compounds, your brain has synapses that connect kind of around. They show a circle. In psychedelic experience, that slightly loosens in your brain, and you start to have these crossovers of insight. Okay, that was what was happening when he was giving people LSD. And they were able to say, oh, I'm not going to be smoking anymore. And they were able to work through things. He couldn't do that anymore. So what he did was he tried to create an experience with the music, with the breathing, because sometimes when people were coming out of these LSD experiences and they kind of hadn't resolved what the insight that they had, they would naturally start breathing.
Mm.
You're also able to move your body in those experiences. So sometimes we're just wanting to sort of move our body and get some breath into a particular place. So they're very different in that Stan Grof had a lot of, he was a therapist. He had a lot of background. There's a lot of science behind transpersonal breath work and transpersonal holotropic breath work, whereas Leonard Orr and rebirthing is a version of it. There's a little bit more particulars. In holotropic breath work, they just tell you lay on the mat and move a lot of air. You're just using that, and it's up to you to decide. How high do you want to go on that journey, depending on the breath. What's your experience? So they're slightly different, but the rebirthing breath work is definitely different from any sort of like actual birthing. You can have experiences, and I actually did have an experience of my own birth because you also do some water. You can do warm water or cold water. So you're doing that breathing process in a bathtub with a snorkel.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
You're
So,
like very
so you can,
adventurous breather.
I didn't believe it. I was like, yeah, right. I'm going to remember my birth. But I actually had an experience where that comes up again. That was a warm water in a bathtub and you're breathing in a certain way. So there are some similarities but you also go into, what was happening with my mother in utero, what was happening in my birth experience. Because in both of these, um, Stan Grof really found that your birth experience is typically the first trauma that you might have experienced. And so he's got a series of sort of layers, or how you came out, or if the cord was around your neck, or if you were a C-section. Like those experiences actually have an impact. The belief is those actually have an impact on your life and how you go about living. So it's kind of fascinating. That gets way deeper into our, to what we
Yes.
typically do. In our corporate programs, we're really just trying to have people recognize this amazing tool that they have. Tell them about the stop, drop, and breathe that that you share with people? Because I think that's one of our best breath work tools.
Yeah, I think of it as like your emergency brake for like anytime you're noticing yourself in or starting to go into that stress response of like fight, flight, or freeze. Um, and when you notice, all right, I'm heading that way, or I'm already like in the midst of it, 3 words: stop, drop, and breathe, right? Because when we're also experiencing higher states of stress, sometimes our rational mind goes offline. So we want something really easy to remember: stop, drop, and breathe. We all hopefully learned stop, drop, and roll. We're going to experience stress a lot more in our lives, hopefully, than any sort of fire instance. So stop, drop, and breathe. We sort of readapted it, and it's really just stop, take a moment, and acknowledge. Oh, I'm maybe tipping the scales into overwhelmed stress or angry stress, right? That distress rather than the eustress, which is the good stress zone that helps, when we learn how to leverage that. You said, like at the beginning of a meeting, if you've got nerves, rather than be crumpled by that, you leverage that stress and you're maybe a little more focused and engaged and on. So stress can really support us in good ways, but we have to stop first, recognize, all right, system overload, drop our awareness into our body. Notice, how am I feeling right now? That check-in we did at the beginning could be a great thing. Am I a hamster, an owl, a sloth? Like, what's going on here? Do I want to run out of this room? Do I want to punch somebody? Or am I totally frozen and overwhelmed? How am I experiencing this stress right now? Drop in, check in, and then remember to breathe. And the simplest version is, and the most powerful, I think, too, right? Sometimes we like we think the solutions to everything are going to be fancy, inaccessible, very
Expensive.
expensive. Yeah, we've got to learn from all these super experts and scientists, which is important, but 3 breaths, very simple, very powerful. And sometimes it might take 10 breaths instead of 3 if you're really feeling frazzled. But we stop, acknowledge, we drop into the body, we check in, and we just start, remember, you can breathe, and start to use that. Inhaling through the nose, exhaling out of the mouth. For 3 breaths, for a minute. We teach that a lot because that's just kind of the emergency plan for not being totally taken over by stress.
Yeah, and it's one of the core things that even though our N for tens that we do at noon and at 3 o'clock each day, those are based on, we say yoga and mindfulness, but both of those are incorporating some sort of breath work within them. It's that connection with the breath.
Mhm.
I'm super excited because for those people who are more interested in some of these next level breaths that Meg and I have been working very hard, doing lots of planning. We've got some weekend workshops coming up in June and in December. We've got another trip to Costa Rica that we're looking at for January 2024. So definitely stay tuned. We are just having so much fun starting to really gather with people again. It feels so good to be in person and that connection with each other. And there's something, in the joy of movement. It's one of the things that she talked about is just that we come together and we share these practices where we're in sync with each other. We feel that connection. And I think that's one of the things that we all missed a lot during COVID. So it's one of the things that we're really excited about that's upcoming.
Yes.
So, Megs, there's a program. Stay tuned. The program that's coming up. What day is it on March? What Saturday?
Saturday the 25th. It'll be in a yoga studio in Philadelphia called Mother Heart. So details are coming out soon. But if you want to explore what we're talking about more than just 3 breaths, sorry about my cat. If he doesn't make a guest appearance, he's just going to yowl. So I'm letting him. He needs connection too. If you want to join us and connect with this growing community and experience not the big 3-hour music breath work, but a shorter breath work class, about an hour and 25 minutes we'll do of some of this breath work. If you're curious and want to learn more, keep an eye on the newsletters. We'll be bringing that out. And then we do have just putting the form in the chat for everybody. If you haven't signed up for the class, Yoga for Mind Body Balance with Tracy George, one of our fabulous guides. She'll be doing that next Friday from 12:30 to 1:15. So that'll be, we always like to have a talk each month, and then we like to have some sort of class that we offer everybody. So that'll be our movement and breathwork class next week.
I
You
also love to say, like, sometimes you can come to a yoga class and just lie on the mat and just follow the breath cues. It's a
Yes.
totally different approach, but that's a way that you can sort of engage in yoga in a totally different way. So if you're like not feeling like the physical part of that, just join the class with Tracy, lie on your mat, and just follow the breath cues.
Yeah. Thank you, Alice, for joining us. Thank you all for joining us. And
Yes.
we're going to send out a follow-up email for everybody who registered with the recording. So if your sound was a little wonky, the recording will hopefully capture the clearest sound, and you can check in again. And we'll see y'all next week, and we'll see y'all soon.
All
So
right.
until
Thanks so
we meet
much.
again, please be well and keep breathing. Remember, 3 breaths is a great start. Thanks all.
Take care. Bye
Take care.
bye.